Hey everyone, and welcome to Already Cancelled. I'm Peter, that is Connor, and we are going to talk about Star Trek The Next Generation, Season 3, Episode 26. It's called The Best of Both Worlds. The Blu-ray says Part 1. I've got a sneaking suspicion that when this was written and aired originally, it was just Best of Both Worlds, and then when they started Season 4, they called the first episode of that Best of Both Worlds Part 2. So I think this is one that retroactively became a Part 1.
I have no idea.
I say that because I know that when they wrote this episode, they had no idea how they were going to wrap it up in the next episode. So,
well, yeah, but that still leaves you a safety net. We'll call it part one. We'll worry about it after the break. We got months to worry about that one.
Yes, but I'm going because IMDb just says Best of Both Worlds, doesn't say Part 1. So I stick a suspicion this is almost like a Back to the Future thing where they added to be continued when the sequel was coming out. I feel like that might be kind of a similar idea. But hey, this is like a super famous episode. This is one that we knew we were building up to. Typically when you talk about Star Trek The Next Generation, you've heard of a couple of episode titles, and it's Best of Both Worlds and All Good Things are the ones that you tend to hear about. And this was kind of notable because of that. It was kind of like, right away there's this expectation as soon as you start this episode, especially after that last one that was such a mediocre.
Right, and sometimes that can work against a thing because, okay, we're coming into this. We've been in our heads building up to this episode for most of this season. We've kind of known, we're in this season now. It's coming.
Yep.
And will it live up to the expectations of that?
Yeah, the gist of the episode, of course, is that there's a Federation outpost which basically goes missing. Like, all the people just vanish, and they're investigating it, and they think it might be the Borg, and they confirm pretty quickly that it probably is. We get introduced to Lieutenant Shelby, who is introduced by an admiral to come and help, because she's been basically spearheading all of the potential countermeasures back home for when the Borg sort of come. And they thought they had more time. They thought that, given how far away that first Borg encounter was, they thought, we've got decades to prepare for this. But of course, they're already starting to appear on the outskirts of Federation space. So that sets things up in a sort of nice mythology context. And then, of course, the Borg eventually do encounter them. One of the main plots of this episode, of course, is Riker kind of clashing with this Lieutenant Shelby. We'll get into why as we go through the episode. But then, of course, the Borg do show up, and the Borg want Jean-Luc Picard. They don't really say why, they just say they want him, and it becomes a bit of a game of cat and mouse, and then building to probably one of the biggest TV cliffhangers of all time. Even knowing this was going to be a cliffhanger, the actual moment itself, I wasn't expecting to be quite that much of a moment.
No, I get where you're coming from. It's a biggie, isn't it?
Yeah.
They definitely wrote this one. Yeah, but we'll worry about it later. Don't worry about it. It's fine.
Yeah. So, because it's to the point where, it cuts to black, and then it even comes up saying to be continued, and the music goes dun 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 dun, right? Which I feel like has became the cliche now, but this was probably the first thing to do it. This was probably the first time.
It was early days, yeah.
So, I suppose I'll ask the question, Cara, what did you think of the Best of Both Worlds?
It lived up to expectations. I mean, that's pretty high praise already.
I suppose you can't really add much to that. Yeah, it pretty much did for me as well. I would say that the only, if I have a negative to say, it's just that I don't necessarily think it's my favourite episode, which I guess in that sense it didn't live up to expectations because the expectation was it would be the best one so far. And I think I would put Q Who above this one. Which maybe a taste thing, but...
Maybe even the first Borg one had...
that was the first Borg.
Was that the first? Was that the first Borg one?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm mixing that with a different Q episode then.
Yeah.
Q episodes, they all have Q in the damn title, and they blur together in my mind. But yeah, no, I think that one had a bit more style from the get-go, which we spoke about in that episode review a lot.
Yeah. Plus, it was the introduction, so there was a lot of cool mystique to the Borg, and there's still some of that here. Don't get me wrong, but
what I really appreciate about this episode is that obviously I knew the broad strokes. Okay, we're doing Borg, we're doing these moments with Picard. We've seen these moments. They've been gift to high hell. We know these moments. But what I wasn't really familiar with was a lot of the Riker plot and his character. What he's going through, his thing with Shelby. I didn't know about all that, so that was fresher. So
Even-
in many ways more interesting.
Even the Borg stuff, as much as obviously we're expecting the Picard to become a Borg, because that's what this episode's famous for. That's the cliffhanger's famous for that. I didn't necessarily know any of the context of anything else. Like, I didn't know the episode was going to end with Riker making the choice to fire on the Borg ship and possibly kill Picard. Like, I did not know that was going to be the actual cliffhanger moment. Was because we had just revealed at that moment that, or just before then really, that Picard was a Borg, and then it kind of addressed it in this final scene where he's on the screen and he's saying, "No, I am Borg. We're coming for Earth." Blah blah blah, and Riker making this choice is kind of like his big climactic moment of the episode. So it actually has a lot of weight behind it beyond just Picard is now a Borg.
Oh, absolutely. And what I love about this, obviously, we know from future knowledge that Picard is around, but in context of looking at this airing at the time as a TV show, even a TV show airing now, end of season 3, I could see them killing off a captain and throwing Riker, giving him a promotion.
That's the thing. This whole episode, for Riker's perspective, is about him being ready to be a captain. So if you're watching this live when it came out, then keep in mind at the time, it wasn't like the message boards and the internet were what they are today. They were in its infancy at best, used by a much smaller group of people. So the idea that you aren't necessarily following the news or maybe the insider stuff as much as we do today and kind of predict these things based on casting news and negotiations and things like that. I have to imagine that back then maybe it is a feasible possibility that the entire point of this episode is to groom the idea of Riker taking the captaincy of the Enterprise, taking that role, because right at the start of the episode, we're introduced to Shelby, and she's a bit of a go-getter, and the old admiral's kind of saying how great she is to Picard, and it's going there, and there's a bit of niceties with Riker and this admiral as well, where Riker invites him to the poker game. He's like, we have to talk to things with your captain, but Shelby plays some poker, blah blah. And right from there, he's like, hey, she's really great, Picard, and he's really selling Picard on this woman, and Picard's it's ultimately like, wait, why are you pitching this woman to me so much? It's like, well, you're going to need someone to be your first officer, and he's like, wait, what? And it's like, it turns out that Riker, not for the first time, admittedly, as they even acknowledge in this scene, has been offered another captaincy. He's been offered a ship, and he says to Picard that, oh, maybe you should, give him a bit of a kick and say, for the good of your career, maybe it's time to move on and take your role as captain. And that becomes kind of like half of what this plot is. And I say half of it because the other half, of course, is the clashing with Shelby herself, where Shelby clearly wants his job. She wants to be the first officer on the Enterprise, and she's constantly second guessing Riker. She's constantly trying to oppose what his orders are, and Riker's having to, as best he can, in a very professional capacity, shoot her down and say, no, I gave you an order, this is why I gave you that order.
And so much of this is him, Shelby is basically him 10 years ago, in terms of where he was as a character, as a person, and that now he's more like Jean-Luc than he was Shelby, right? He's closer to that. My
favorite actual story development in this entire episode is towards the end of the episode when Picard, so the Borg eventually be on board the ship and they take Picard, and obviously Worf and Riker tried to fight them off, but it was futile to use their word, and he gets up and he's like, okay, right, I'm going to take an away team, and he's like, I'm going to take Crusher, I'm going to take Data and Worf, we're going to go and get Captain back. Pardon me. And Shelby tries to interfere with this and say, no, I'm better suited because I've been studying the Borg, blah blah blah, and it's Troy who comes in and says, and I love this, she gives Riker the speech that Riker basically gave Picard back in the episode 1 of this show, where she says, you're now acting captain, which means you can't go into dangerous situations. Now you're the one who has to be protected, and you have to send other people on away missions. And Riker can't say a goddamn word, because that's exactly what his argument's always been with Picard, and he has to accept that now he is acting captain, he has to stay on the bridge.
Yeah, and that's what I love about this is as much as, we know sure Picard's back, it's fine, but in context of this episode, it does everything that it should to make you believe that, no, this is Riker's time. This is Riker's time to take over the captaincy. Shelby is going to be his new first officer. It does everything it needs to establish that dynamic.
Yeah,
and plausibly and realistically as well, not just like random guest star.
Yeah, and yeah, because it feels like she's been built up as a proper character, and she's constantly challenging a lot of the crew. She's, right at one point she goes over Riker's head to talk to Picard directly, and Picard knows that this is going to piss off Riker, and Picard, tries to treat it as gently as he can and make it clear that he's understood her, but like, Riker's making the right call, blah blah blah. And when Riker complains to Picard, he's like, it kind of sounds like someone I hired wants to be my first officer. Like, he really like makes the point clear. But on the larger scheme of things, though, because we know Picard's coming back, just because we're in the future and we know that he's around, I remember like, my first thing is here because they're giving this Shelby so much time. I was like, she's getting assimilated at some point, and he's like, she's here to be killed off in a spectacular way. And maybe she won't, because I was expecting it this episode. Maybe it'll happen in season 4, episode 1. I don't know, but
yeah, maybe. Do you think there was ever any discussion amongst at this point? In time when they were writing this, they went, do we do it? Do we go through with it? Do we? Is this the end of Picard? And do we write Patrick Stewart out of the show and kind of go forward from here?
I feel like I have to imagine if there was, it didn't came from a creative perspective. It probably came from a maybe Patrick Stewart was like redoing his contract or something, so they had to have a way. They had to have like an avenue to go down.
Well, maybe, but I like if it was me, I would like as a creative, I would want to think about that at least, like take that possibility of, okay, we've had 3 seasons with Picard dead, and the show, do we want to shake it up? And I can see the creative reason for wanting to do that.
I can see the creative reason. I don't think the studio would ever let them do it in a million years, though, because Patrick Stewart's your star. He's the draw for a lot of people.
But do you think in the writers' room they were like, do you think we can even ask if we're allowed to do this? Like, do you think they considered it?
I don't know. I feel like because it was going into like a between seasons portion where they didn't necessarily know, if they were getting renewed. Because that's the thing, they did not have a renewal when they wrote this episode. This was, classic network TV shit. Even though it was syndicated, straight to syndication.
Same old.
Yeah. This was a cliffhanger without a guarantee of ever coming back. Which, just imagine if it got cancelled after this episode. Imagine the fury.
I think they were probably confident. I think TV, when you're a showrunner or producer, you have those internal metrics. You've got the Star Trek brand going for you. You know where it is. You know your ratings. You probably, you're hedging your bets, sure, well, usually, but you probably know if you're safe or not.
I have a bit of trivia here that Tara told me before I watched this episode. Is that the writer who wrote this episode didn't think he was going to come back. He just wrote this episode and left, but then got rehired and had to like solve his own cliffhanger. he left thinking, they can solve that on their own. I'm going to go.
Someone else's problem. Yeah.
So at least from that perspective, like the person who wrote that cliffhanger didn't necessarily even think they'd be the one who tries to fix it. No,
but what I mean is whoever was looking at the editing at the end, the showrunner, producer, whoever it was, could have said, no, we don't want a cliffhanger for this. We want an ending just in case. If they felt worried, right, they would have made that call. Sure,
yeah. Someone up the food chain would have maybe said that. Then again, some more spectacularly dumb decisions have been made in TV, so I wouldn't count on it.
I am concerned about some producers in the industry, to be honest, just being tone deaf to their own success.
Creator of Chris Carter, the creator of X-Files, is the one that comes to mind, where he refuses to give an ending even when he's been given like 5 chances of coming back, and it's always the last time. It's always the last time. You don't get any more.
Do you know what the problem is? He's been enabled too many times now. There's always, you'll get what you find, one more try, and now he just doesn't believe that it's the last one. He's like, screw it, I'm just going to keep doing it. You're going to keep bringing me back eventually.
God, you're going to have Mulder and Scully in the wheelchairs at some point with him writing them. Anyway, so no, I mean, to get to the plot, obviously they eventually they encounter the Borg and they come straight for Picard. Before that, there's a lot of talk about what we can do with the safety, they don't have any weapons that can really do much damage to the Borg. They have to keep changing the frequencies of their shields because the Borg keep adapting. And we see that with the phasers as well, is that once you've fired the phasers at them a couple of times, they adapt and they can basically shield themselves from those phaser frequencies. Because when they do beam across to try and save Picard, there's like 4 of them, and you get the impression that all 4 of them have different frequencies on their phasers. The idea being they can all get a couple of shots each before...
Yeah. You even have that scene of them setting it at different things, and it tells you that that's what they're doing. And they're like, well, we get maybe 1, 2, at most 3 shots before they adapt, and so we can only take down a handful.
And correct me if I'm wrong, back in the first episode, because this is only the second episode with the Borg, did they say resistance is futile in the last one? I don't remember if they did, but because I felt like here when they take Picard over at first and he's saying that he'll resist to his last breath or something to that effect, all the voices just say like resistance is futile, like your breath doesn't matter.
I don't remember it either. The problem is I know we were cracking jokes about it.
I'm sure we were,
because again it's like their most famous line, right? So we just know it. So they wouldn't have had to say it in that episode for us to just be thinking about it.
I'm sure we were cracking jokes just because of pop culture, but because when they said it, I thought, was that the first time they've said that? Because I feel like it was kind of monumental that it came from Picard saying he was going to resist, only for them to turn around and saying that resistance is futile.
Yeah.
I kind of like that. But that's the last time you see Picard, right? And then when we have the away team come over and they're kind of snooping around, and much like the first time we saw people on the Borg cube, the Borgs don't even care. You're just not a threat, so they just ignore you until you start interfering. And in this episode, of course, they eventually start interfering with things that make them start fighting back. But for the longest time, they don't even do anything. And they find, they're tracing Picard's transponder, and they eventually find it, and his outfit's there just in a drawer on its own. And it's like, oh, it's already happened. And they do that thing when they're defending themselves with all the Borg, where you see him from the side, the profile shot, and then he turns and he's got the Borg.
And I love this shot because he's got like the laser, and he's dead facing the camera. The laser is in the camera, and it's uncomfortable to watch in this, because obviously actors don't look at the camera. That's like the thing, but to even have this light from it's essentially his eye line flashing into your eyes because of it. It's really uncomfortable and effective.
Yeah. When they beam back, Worf's like, because Riker or whatever, did you find Picard? Did you find him? And I can't remember what the setup line was, but Worf just shouts out, he is a Borg. He is one of them. And that's when they come on the screen at the end and say, because they basically realize where they're going, because the Enterprise is struggling to keep up with them, because they're going at like faster than speeds than the Enterprise can keep up with for at least long durations, because it's like, okay, we can only go this speed for so long before we have to slow down. Otherwise, we're going to do irreparable damage.
We're going to blow up the engines.
In fact, at one point, they have to evacuate the engine room, and they mention kind of casually that they've lost like 11 people down the engine area.
11 people dead and 8 injured, or 8 unaccounted for, maybe.
I think it was 8 missing, yeah. And so, you get these dire straits, but the big thing, though, is that this cube is on its way to Earth, and when they're actually, the first time they're talking to Picard when they bring him aboard the ship, they mention that they kind of want to use him as the face of their campaign, if you will, on Earth. Like, Picard's going to be the one they put at the front talking, so that they'll recognize someone and, see a human being.
Part of it as well is we've already got the best of you, so what are you bothering for? This is how it's going to be, and like they say, resistance is futile.
If I was to make a guess, I would say that Shelby's going to somehow end up sacrificing herself to save Picard next episode.
Yeah, it makes such a big deal this episode about her taking these extra risks, right, and not playing it safe. And I definitely feel like okay, she's going to take a risk one too far, and it'll maybe not go her way, but it'll pay off in terms of saving Picard.
Yeah, that's the thing, is like all episode it felt like she was being so contradictory to Riker, like trying to question everything, going above his head, Riker getting pissed about this, talking to Troy about it. All that stuff was really good, but once she actually went on the away team and she was trusted to be the leader of the away team, she didn't feel like she had that attitude anymore. It felt like, no, she's in charge, she's actually operating like Riker would have back in like early season 1.
Yeah.
And it never felt like she was being defiant on the mission itself. When she was reporting back to the Enterprise, I never felt like she was going against Riker's orders or anything like that at that point. So
no, it was really setting up a captain first officer dynamic relationship between the two of them all episode, with her challenging him when she could, when it was safe to do so.
But what we've actually glossed over here, probably one of my favourite scenes with them two actually, is after the scene where she goes above his head, Riker follows her out into the turbo lift, and there's a scene in here where he actually gets very threatening, not in like a physical way or anything, just in a sense where he says, if you go above me again, if you go around me to Picard again, I can't remember the exact word to use, but I will snap you back so far that you'll think you're a first year cadet again, just down the food chain. Like your military career, as it were, your Starfleet career will be set back years if you do this to me again.
And it's, I think, pride a little bit. He's proud of his role, and he what he is there, but part of it is this, chain of command. He's like, no, you got a problem? That's fine. You want to talk to Picard? That's fine. You come through me. You do it in official capacities. I think that's something that we've always seen Riker respect, even in his brasher days, right? He always had that chain of command. He never disobeyed Picard in a direct way. He would challenge him, yes, but he would never try and go around his orders or anything like that. And I think that was part of what this was supposed to be.
Yeah, and one of the first lines she has when he goes into the turbo lift is she says, "You never ordered me not to talk to Picard." Like, well, that's very pedantic.
It's like, yeah, and he's like, you shouldn't have to. It's implied just in the job.
Yeah. So I thought that was he got quite harsh, but at the same time I didn't blame him for it because she is trying him. She is doing everything she can. She's using every kind of little loophole, every little way she can kind of just bend the rules to get around what he's telling her to do. So I really like that, and I think it all builds up to that like him taking this role as captain at the end of the episode, accepting that he can't go on the away mission, and it's actually Shelby who's saying, hey, we can stall for more time and try to take another attempt, because Crusher even says if we can get Picard over here, I might be able to change him back, I might be able to fix whatever they've done to him. But they're on this time here where any minute now, because Geordi's like keeping track of this, Geordi says any minute now they're going to go back to warp 9.7 or whatever it is, and we're not going to be able to follow them. We've followed them at that speed too long, we can't do it anymore. And they've been developing this reflector, all episode, between Shelby and Geordi and whoever. And it's like, okay, this is our one chance to maybe use it. And if we can do enough damage now, maybe we can save Earth before they get to the rest of the fleet, yada, yada, yada. And Riker has to make this tough call. He says fire, and that is the cliffhanger. He's looking right at Picard as he says fire.
Yeah, and I think, objectively speaking, he makes the right call.
Yeah, no,
right?
I agree.
In terms of, okay, no, Picard, maybe there's a chance you can save him, and that's, idealistic, and that's what you want to do. But when there is the fate of everything else at stake, Picard would make the same choice.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
Sure.
I think it's important that Picard would agree with this choice. Picard would definitely agree with this choice. And we should mention Picard, because Picard has a really interesting scene as well, where, because there's a bit in the middle of the episode after the first time the Borg see them, and they have like a sort of a fight where they're caught in a tractor beam, and they only just barely get out, and this is when everything has to be evacuated in the engine rooms and all that. They basically skedaddle over to like a nebula, this where they can hide, right? So they're hiding in this sort of this dust nebula. I think Picard mentioned at one point, and eventually they have to run out again because the Borg start dropping mines essentially to just sort of fish them out. But they're hiding, so there's a bit of a calm down for a little while. And during this is a scene where Picard sort of goes on basically a tour of the ship, and he ends up in 10 forward, and Guinan's in there. And they have this interesting conversation where he's, it's tradition for a captain to tour the ship before a big battle. And Guinan kind of corrects him and says, well, I thought the tradition was before a hopeless battle. And he says, oh, that's not entirely true. And he gives a couple of examples of...
He gives one key example, and it's Napoleon at Trafalgar.
Which...
And it's like, well, sure that the battle was won, but he was lost.
Yeah. The battle was
Nelson,
won, but it was this idea of a captain's sacrifice, and it's not so much Picard definitely thinks he's going to lose here, but this is after the point where the Borg have asked for him directly, and Guinan's clearly reading on him here that he is willing to go down for the survival of the Federation, certainly, and certainly also of the ship in a much more closer spectrum.
You get the feeling that if it came to it again, if the offer was put to him, surrender, maybe he would consider the personal surrender.
Yeah.
It's definitely weighing on him.
Yeah. So I really like that scene. It was this because so much of the episode is focused on Riker and Shelby. The Picard it was funny because I think getting into this episode, I was expecting it to be very Picard centric because of what the big ending is going to be. Because I know that it's all about Picard being assimilated. So I expected a very Picard centric episode. So I was surprised when it was actually mostly this plot about Riker, and this was the one scene in the middle where I felt the weight of Picard's side of it. It was like, okay, we didn't need to do a whole plot about Picard and about his sacrifice. It was
we understand Picard well enough.
But that one scene did go a long way. And like you say, the Riker stuff was kind of surprising because I just didn't expect it. There was kind of the element of the episode which isn't talked about in pop culture. It's just it's there if you've seen it. But
I get why it's not talked about. As good as it is, it's it's easy to talk about the Borg, and the big shocking moment with Picard, right? As opposed to, oh, look at the character drama that's there as well, which arguably is more interesting and has more weight to it, but it's less pop culture-y to talk about.
Yeah. So yeah, the Borg are on their way to Terran Earth, as Worf calls it, which is Earth.
Sector 1.
Yeah, and Sector 2814, I think you'll find. As a bit Green Lantern humor there for you if you're not familiar with DC Comics. I'll just explain that joke. Yeah. But yeah, they're on their way to Earth, and we end with Riker saying fire. So I mean, will their weapon even work? Who's to say? I mean, obviously, if you've seen the next episode, you'll know, but we don't know. So we'll find out.
There is a genuine level of surprise and unknown elements, even though we know the broad strokes, like going into this episode, we know some of the beats.
Well, to be fair, the only beat I now know is that somehow Picard is fixed. That's the only beat I know now.
No, it's true. It's true. But this is what I mean. Like, even going into these famous episodes where we know broad stroke elements, there is so much we don't actually know that it is exciting still, right? It's not like this has all been spoiled for us over the years.
Yeah. To say this is a very minimal moment in the episode, but I did enjoy Wesley Crusher being terrible at cards. He's playing poker.
He's so shit at poker, and it's so satisfying.
Yeah, I don't even really know the rules of poker that well, but I do know that when Riker puts down a card that's just a 2, and Wesley had a couple of jacks, I'm like, yeah, that was definitely that was a good bluff on Riker's part. I'll say that much.
Yeah, I mean, I get the impression it's easy to intimidate Wesley into just folding, which is something he's going to need to work on at the academy if he wants to grow into any sort of captaincy material.
That is true. Well, that's the other thing is Riker even has some. He questions what he does want now, because he always wanted to be a captain, and he has that scene with Troy where he even says, I kind of gave up our romance because in pursuit of being a captain, I gave up our relationship for a career. It's almost just ironic that they ended up on the ship together, in season 1. That was kind of like oh shit, we ended up in the same place, and it's interesting him saying, well, but every time I'm offered one now, I don't take it. Like, I love being in the Enterprise.
We've heard about him being offered one before this, right? Because obviously they mentioned that this is his third one that he's turned down. I remember at least once.
Yeah,
before this.
It's happened at least once. But he's been offered a ship, and for whatever reason, turned it down. So, he just loves being on the Enterprise, I guess, and maybe if Picard's in a sort of weaker state after this Borg transformation, he's back to being Picard, but he's like, get PTSD or something.
Maybe he's acting captain for a few months or something. No,
I was just gonna say he feels more of a reason to be there for him. He needs Riker as his first officer. He needs to be there to like help Picard back on his feet, kind of thing. Not so much that he has to be actively the captain, but
he's just there for Picard on the familiarity.
Yeah, I could see that. You have familial necessity.
Close enough.
Yeah, you know what I'm trying to say. Familial. There you go.
You do not like that word, do you?
You know what I was trying to say? There's too many L's. I don't do well with words with too many separate L's. When the L's are together, it's fine. But once you throw the word parallelogram at me, I'm starting to struggle a little bit.
That is a tongue twister, that one. I'll give you that.
R's and L's, when you put R's and L's together, a lot of them, it's a messy time for me. But that is the best of both worlds, part 1. Obviously very good. It's definitely one of the best episodes of the season. In fact, before we get to part 2 of this, because this is worth mentioning, we always do our top 5 episodes of the season.
Yeah, and it's interesting because this is the first time we've had to break up like a pairing like this, where it's almost like, no, I don't want to do it. I want to go straight into the next one, but I'm like, nope, calm down. We've got to do the thing, and I know that.
We do our top 5 and our bottom 3, and we'll see how we feel about the season as a whole. And there's obviously some candidates that we're expecting, but that'll be next. And then we'll obviously be starting season 4 after that. We are more or less back on to one per week, although I think we actually snuck this one in as an extra this weekend. So you may actually have 2, with this one being the second one this week, and then back
it's
to normal.
going to be a little bit hit or miss for the next few weeks with various other shows.
Yeah, we're always going to make sure there's one at least out every week. We're on 2 a week for a while. There's a few more things on right now to slow us down, but I think we actually snuck out. This probably will be the second one this week, and then yeah, so we'll try and keep them coming as consistently as we can. But always at least one per week is the plan. So that is Best of Both Worlds. Let us know what you think of this one in the comments below. You can like and subscribe. Liking is very important on YouTube. It lets the YouTube algorithm know that we're worth recommending out to people. So please do that. You can also support us via patreon.com/MailOfFuzzTV for as little as $1 per month. And you get some bonus content, and you keep all the content coming from us. So if you want to feel warm and fuzzy in your not assimilated heart, and I'm being distracted because Connor keeps hiccuping.
Yeah, subscribe to the Patreon, and maybe we can fund a way to cure this.
Cure chronic hiccups. Yeah,
yeah. Worth a try.
So thank you very much once again for watching or listening. Guys on Twitter @mailed_fuzz for channel updates. But otherwise, that is us. So thank you once again. Keep watching TV. Keep watching Star Trek. And remember, when it comes to the ladies, Wesley Crusher is in complete control.